Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jamin Warren, founder of Killscreen.
Hello, how's everyone doing today? It's good that you're in here because it's really, really hot outside. My name is Jamin Warren. I used to be an arts and entertainment reporter at the Wall Street Journal before starting Killscreen, a video game arts and culture company. We started it with the explicit reason of looking at all the things that are new and interesting and looking at games at the intersection of arts, culture, design, etc., which is why I'm very happy to make an introduction for Chris Bell. Chris Bell just finished working on that Journey game with that game company and now has started a new studio called The Wilderness. The Wilderness has two L's. The second L is for love or laughter. He will let you know. His other game, Way, is here at the festival. You can go out and play it as well. He hails from Boston, lives in Los Angeles, and he asked me to introduce him as the most existential man in video games. Please give a warm welcome to Chris Bell.
Hello. Hey. All right. First, just a large thank you to Asi and Jeff and Michelle and everyone who's set up this event and helped me speak with each of you today. A bit of a disclaimer, if you saw me talk at the Game Developers Conference, I gave a talk there a couple months ago called Designing for Friendship. This talk heavily borrows from that, so if you were there and you are here today, meet me after and we'll go grab lunch and you can talk to me about whatever else you want to talk about. Yeah, I'm Chris. I have worked on a number of games as a designer. Designed this game, Way, with a team at Carnegie Mellon. After that, went to work on Journey with that game company, where I was a designer and producer. And thank you. And following the wrapping up of Journey, I started my own studio, The Wilderness. And this is right now based in Santa Monica, but we're probably looking into San Francisco, and that's not important. So anyways, as Jamin kindly pointed out, those are the games I've worked on, both Way and Journey. Both of them pair anonymous strangers around the world in various collaborative contexts in the hopes that they might empathize with each other and become friends. Now, like choosing to stand up and contribute to progressive social change, something many of the persons in this room are trying to motivate their players to do, friendship is not something that can be forced upon people. Friendship occurs as a spontaneous creation of the participants. And so if it can't be forced, if you can't create a rule that says players must become friends in all that being friends may entail, how do we design for it? How do we design to create a dynamic from which friendship will emerge? Now, these are the sorts of questions that we asked in the creation of Way and Journey, and I'll be explaining how we answered these questions through the designs of each respective game, as well as some additional points about my own particular aesthetic and design process. Now, many of you in this room today have a problem that you're probably trying to solve. For many of you, there may be a moment in time from which that goal really started to take hold of you and become a focus of how you spend your time. I'm going to start with what that moment was for me. It was a personal experience that heavily impacted my own goals for change and an experience that mirrors my own game aesthetic despite occurring years before I ever even started making games. 4 years ago, I traveled to Japan to study abroad with a group of student artists. It was my first ever morning in the country, and I was traveling to the Tsukiji fish market in search of artistic inspiration. Now, Tsukiji is the largest wholesale fish market in the world and features about 1,000 different vendors, each selling fish just as it comes in off the boats from the night before, the night's catch, into the Tokyo docks. Now, the market seems to stretch on forever with every kind of fish imaginable. And so needless to say, it's incredibly immersive, and you could spend hours and hours just losing yourself there. Now, when we arrived at the market, my instructor's classmates and I chose a nearby shrine as our rendezvous. At a particular time, a local bus was going to appear and carry us away to our next destination. Now, it was on a schedule, and so we were told that we couldn't be late, or else we'd be left behind. For the next several hours, I immersed myself in the market, took photos, drew, ate fish. I became so immersed that, sure enough, When I checked the time, I only had 4 minutes to get back to the shrine. The market's enormous, and so of course I was lost. And unless I ran in the direct direction of the shrine right then and there, I wasn't going to make it. It was my first morning in Japan. I had no cell phone. I could barely speak a word of Japanese. I didn't even know the name of the hotel at which we were staying. And Tokyo has a lot of hotels. So I began to panic. Now, fortunately, I had remembered I had captured a photograph of the shrine. And so I pulled out my camera, I loaded the photograph onto the display, and I held it up and I just yelled "sumimasen," which is like the only word of Japanese I knew, which means excuse me, hoping for the closest person around to help me. Now that woman, that happened to be a woman, 60 or so years old, dressed in white. She was speaking to a man in a truck. And when she heard me, she turned, she saw the desperation on my face, and I held up the display and pointed at it and threw up my hands like this, asking, just as if to say, where is this? Well, she immediately ended her conversation and smiled at me, grabbed me by the hand, and started running. We ran 4 blocks and got to the shrine just as the bus was boarding to leave. She bowed and smiled and disappeared forever. Now, that memory will never leave me, right? It's ingrained into my being. It affects how I behave, how I interact with other people, how I use my time. It made me acknowledge just how much language divides us, keeps the world from engaging with each other, and how silly we are to let it. We have so much to offer each other if only we had the ability to speak. How fortunate, then, that we can bring this epiphany to others by taking this experience and bundling it into a game. What would that game be? What is the system and the rule set that frames this experience? We only need to break it down to find it. Now, this event took place in the infinitely complex system that we call reality. To recreate it as a game and find meaning, as designers, we have to focus in and choose the parts relevant to the scope of my perspective and my narrative as a player, and her perspective and her narrative as a player. And so we pick out factors like the stimulating environment that led to me feeling overwhelmed, my goal of getting to the rendezvous point, the amount of time before the bus leaves, the serious consequences of getting left behind, the distance of the shrine, and the camera with a picture of the shrine, which served as my only available tool. For the woman, we pick out her old age, her investment in her conversation, her knowledge of where the shrine was. And then there's the relationship between us, the communication barrier that separates us, and the empathy that allows us to understand each other in spite of that. Now, all of these relate to create a dynamic that leads players feeling something similar to what I felt that day. And then as designers, we have to sit back and let the players play. Now, again, every piece here is integral toward framing player behavior, toward making that feeling happen. Though I would like to take a moment and focus on a key part of the system, in particular, the role of serious consequence and how it contributes to the experience. Now, there's a broad misperception that games should be safe. I've been watching the Games for Change Twitter stream over the last few days, and it often seems that whenever games are discussed as useful environments for players to learn in, spaces to test out the effects of their actions, see the cause and effect, there's this assumption that it should be a safe environment for experimentation. Well, there was nothing safe about that day in the market. Without serious consequence, without the notion that I was going to be stranded, so much of what made that experience meaningful is lost. Without serious consequence, this story becomes little more than me asking for directions or where the bathroom is. I would not have been panicking. I would not have been rushed to tear out my camera and scream into a random crowd of strangers. And I would certainly not have felt so deeply indebted to the woman. Instead, I could have been careless with the situation, I could have treated it as just a game. It wouldn't have stayed with me, it wouldn't have shaped my work like it has, and it wouldn't have become my signature call towards social change. So, something to consider when designing your call to action. Now, if you're familiar with Way, you'll notice some similarities between the interpersonal dynamic between myself and the woman at the Skeezy Fish Market and the dynamic between players in Way. In Way, you and an anonymous other player, a stranger from somewhere around the world, are paired up without the ability to talk or type. Together, you venture toward each other from opposite ends of the world, solving the puzzles between you. The game is played in split screen, and each player sees the world differently. One player will have information the other does not, such as the location of an invisible platform, where they need to jump, or perhaps a trap that they need to avoid. And so you need to communicate this information with each other to progress. Without text or speech communication, players instead have to share their information by puppeteering their avatars. You can point, you can wave, mime a circle, nod your head, whatever works within the system. All of these are player-controlled, ensuring that puppetry is a manifestation of your specific voice. And when the game starts, you're alone. It's not until you proceed a bit further that your world splits in two and the other person appears. Now, this creates a sense of surprise. The other person is a discovery, an epiphany, and it's this realization of the other that grabs your focus. With the focus on the other, the game's signature consequence is established and begins to grow. Players must rely on each other to make it to the end. If you quit, you'll be abandoning this other person and preventing them from reaching the end, and must endure what guilt may come from that. Now, as players learn to communicate and work together, they build a relationship and bond, raising investment in each other and making the consequence for abandonment that much more significant over time. Little is explained within the game world, empowering the players to become teachers unto each other. Rather than teach the players ourselves, we instead impart as much of that responsibility to the players, which provides them greater opportunity to speak to each other, giving them the opportunity for a stronger connection. When one player understands and does not teach it to the other, it can lead to failure and frustration. But this too can be positive, as we've seen players realize they had information that the other did not, and then feel shame when not helping each other. Now, if this occurred outside the game, we would hope that that person reflects on not helping the other person when they had the information to do so. That's something we value. Now, because neither player has all of the information, players are interdependent. Each player needs the other. In order to finish the game, you must invest yourself and commit to playing with a single other person. Now, I'm going to talk about the ending of the game. So if you're a person who hasn't played it and one of those people who doesn't like spoilers, you have your warning. Should the players stick together and overcome the obstacles that divide them, they meet successfully in the middle of the world. Here, they're free to puppeteer their characters, to hug, to hold hands, place a head on each other's shoulder, punch each other, all actions that were previously impossible when at a distance. Well, after the final puzzle, they reach a wall of the world engraved with a map of planet Earth, and on it, they can draw. So for the first time, players are able to actually speak to each other. After building up this relationship, this is the big payoff. They carve hello, they exchange names, they collaborate in drawing pictures, they circle where they're from. For many players, it's here where they discover that they've been communicating with someone who doesn't even speak their language. I'll share some others with you as well. Here you can see players have framed themselves as an angel and a sun goddess, I don't know. Here, another couple of players have shown each other flying above the world. Here, someone writes, "We rock," and one player is drawing in red, the other person's drawing in blue, and so they are collaborating here. This one's funny. One person draws brains and writes the zombie, and then the other guy actually went in and drew blood squirting out of his neck. So you may have heard of Journey. Interestingly, Journey and Way were developed independently and without knowledge of each other, and both arrived at similar yet unique conclusions about encouraging strangers toward friendship. Now, Journey is an online game where anonymous players walk, surf, and fly toward a mountain, and can connect with one player at a time in the process. Connections occur when two players are in the same part of the world. If the two players move far enough apart, they are disconnected. They can't talk or type. Instead, they communicate through a musical call and the simple motions of their characters. I'd like to briefly mention that I wasn't on Journey for the first half of its development. That time was spent developing Way independently and without knowledge of Journey. And so I'll speak specifically to Journey as we developed it in the last 16 months. Now, one of the focal questions of Journey is, what if in a game about discovery and transformation, you experience that transformation alongside another? What will you feel? Will you feel connected? Like many linear games and other classic stories, Journey borrows the structure of the monomyth, a transformation story. Emotions arc as the protagonists pass from experience to experience. Because you engage in these experiences with another player, there's potential to share a wide range of emotions with them. Now, because there's no textual or verbal communication in Journey, it's impossible to know exactly what the other person is feeling or thinking. Personally, I find that beautiful. After all, no two persons in this room could ever know exactly how the other feels. We are creatures of interpretation, each our own perspective. As in Way, without words, the player is able to project their own thoughts onto the person and what they think the other person is thinking, generating perceived empathy. This is true not only of a moment of discovery, but also when players choose to walk away from each other. When two players separate, they disconnect. Why did that person leave? Did they not want to travel with me? Were they distracted by something? Should I follow? These are all questions. You wonder about them because you don't know for certain. Now, when players disconnect, they disappear from the world. Because the world of Journey has many large and barren vistas, players feel small and lonely. Because it's barren, this also means that when another player appears and moves through the landscape, they become a focus. Journey also maintains the important fourth wall, similar to Way, preventing people from communicating and adding verbs that we didn't want in there as designers. Though one might argue text and speech allow players to more clearly discuss or rejoice over a particular event, text and speech also introduce a number of those unwanted verbs that break the experience. Players can be pulled out, the game could become an object for discussion versus the world that simply is, etc. Now, personally, I prefer that players communicate through nonverbal actions. This places everyone on a more even ground. Any two players have the same actionable verbs. Now, in Journey, one of the clearest examples of these is the player's musical call. The call serves a number of functions. One of which is to get the attention of the other player. Now, though it's a single button, the call has a range of expression, and that's really important. You tap the call in quick succession, and it resembles excitement. Or you can hold it down for a big, loud burst, and that might be more of a shout or a large hey. Or maybe you're upset, or maybe you're super excited. How players call helps bring identity to their person. Now, I spent many hours playtesting with teammates at that game company, and I could often tell one person from another just by how they use their calls to express themselves. Like any strong relationship, it requires the other person has a unique, personal human identity for you to resonate with. We can remove text and speech, but we must not remove the player's voice, right? Their ability to express emotions, feelings, and opinions. This call provides other functions. Players can harmonize with other players in the world, glowing the players and giving them expendable energy with which they can fly. Players obtain the resource by physically touching each other, encouraging them to stay close, again bonding them, or by calling them to each other within the radius of the bubble created by the call. This shared dynamic creates a call and response. I call to you, you fly and expel your resource, you call to me, I fly and expel mine. This creates a rhythm between the players. Now, I personally like to think of it like a dance, or perhaps a version of leapfrog. This is an example of reciprocity, equal give and take between both parties. Reciprocity is a fundamental characteristic of friendship. Without the other person around, players are unable to continually fly, and so when they're gone, or when they choose not to help, you can feel that. You feel it in the slow walk, your progress hampered, never obstructed. This is us designing for a feeling of longing. Together we fly toward a single shared goal, the mountaintop, which funnels the players together. Now, both of these games, Way and Journey, attempt to establish a bond between players. But what it takes to become a friendship, to transcend and become something bigger than the game, requires growing beyond the game itself. Within these controlled systems like Way and Journey, it's impossible to include so many of the things that might strengthen the bond between two persons. This isn't just about getting these two people to enjoy their time together in the game, but to empower those persons to continue to discover what else they might have to offer each other, to share. And so instead, we focus on establishing the connection, and then upon completion, both games invite players to carry their friendship forward. Way with the drawing wall, and in Journey, by revealing the PlayStation network ID of the other player. Now I'm going to close by sharing with you some comments from players who have written to us with how they've been affected. At first, I wasn't sure if I was going to show these, but I think they emphasize just how much these games can resonate with players. We've seen these both with Way and Journey, but I'm going to limit these to the responses we've gotten for Way to emphasize that it's achievable with even a young team on a small timetable. Again, Way was made in 12 weeks with a team of 6 students. There's no magic here, right? It's a collection of rules of cause and effect that frame players' actions. The choices in the game and the message the game imparts are one and the same. Every rule, every detail, all of that has an effect on the player's experience. And if you're working and designing with that in mind, then you can get this too. So that's my talk.
So my first question is, what happened to the Japanese woman that you met?
She becomes forever immersed in everything that I create.
Right. But you guys don't become like Facebook friends or anything like that?
Well, that's interesting because when we were originally considering the idea for Way, for example, when we were still in school, came about from this idea of the Universal Play Project. Can we use play as a language to bring cultures together, to get two people to bond and have a relationship? We didn't know what that was yet. We didn't know about Way. We found Way later after we tried a bunch of other stuff that was total, crap, fail again. And then one of the solutions we were looking at was like, oh, what if you do a game together and then you start to uncover someone's Facebook information? They're like, no, that's stalkerish. And so it was much better. It was like, oh no, we'll just have an emotional arc, and then at the end, they can freely talk to each other, and what they choose to share is of their own accord and represents who they are.
Right. So you leave like a phone number.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, we have had people leave emails and on that wall and
that's
phone numbers and that sort of thing.
I mean, I guess that raises this larger question about what constitutes friendship, and it seems like you're creating an impermanent type of friendship, like someone holding the door open for you, or that type. And was the hope that this game would engender kind of deeper, long-lasting eHarmony style relationships?
So the notion, right, is it's more about establishing the bond, that moment of connection. Like, how could we possibly put all the things that would get two people to resonate and sing with each other and allow them to become friends and all that means? And so it's really about giving that bond and then opening the door up at the end of the game to say, well, you guys have certainly worked together and had this positive relationship, and here maybe there's something that could be said for that out here as well.
Right. Do you think that like our modern conceptions of friendship have changed at all in the digital age? I mean, people seem to tier them at some level. Where do you see Way fitting in to that ecosystem?
So, yeah, I mean, the thing about modern friendships and the sort of the social circles that I walk in, I think we all kind of fit in, is like the internet is huge and awesome, and yet we still only kind of talk to the same people, and my Twitter feed, I'm always having the same discussions with the same people, and those are certainly my friends, but I never I never can really pierce out of that. It's like the internet is so big, and yet we have these problems with language that don't allow me to engage with this person on the other side of the world who has all these other thoughts. And if we could sort of somehow create ways to foster that, then maybe the world would be better off and we'd stop fighting with each other.
Sure. One of the things that you seemed to critique was, this idea that experimentation should go hand in hand with some element of danger. I was just wondering, there was a startup whose name is escaping me. That was it was a flirtation app, and several underage. They created a separate network for people underage, and like many open social networks, created some obviously undesirable outcomes and interactions between older folks and kids. How do you balance that very real need for public safety with the desire to push people's limits about what they're comfortable with?
Right. So I think like one example that works well in this situation is like chat roulette. Right. Like chat roulette was totally abused. It was this great portal to talk and speak with anyone in the world. And
well, I mean, abused. It depends on what you came there for, right?
Well,
so,
sure.
For some people, it was.
Sure, it was exactly what they wanted. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Not necessarily what was, I would say, intended for. I guess was intended for anything, but this notion that when you have the persons who can kind of come in and claim it for themselves versus allow a sort of a homogenized space where everyone can sort of be in there together. You compare that to something like the I don't know if you know the London New York Telectroscope.
I do not.
It's basically a big public arts work where there's it looks like a telescope or a telectroscope is tunneling through London and New York, and it's like coming out of the ground, and you can like look into it, and you can actually wave and see the people on the other side. And it's like that's similar to chat roulette, but because it's in a public space, it has all of these other rules and framing that sort of encourage the behavior to be a certain way, right? Where the people can't come in and sort of dictate it for themselves and claim it for their own, and everyone gets to share and enjoy it.
Sure. Although I will say, by virtue of living in New York, being in a public space is not always the necessary deterrent in terms of keeping people in line. One last question. You talked about. It seems like there's a presumption. We talked about this a little bit backstage. Is that you want people to communicate through these games, people who don't have a shared language, but there is the language of games, right? And with Journey, the passport there is a $400 piece of electronics and internet access, and there are all these things, so it's not quite as pure as like your interaction with the woman in Japan. Again, like how do you make sense of that? Because people have different play styles, but also different game literacies, and their ability to engage in these experiences might be limited.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think this thing could manifest itself in a whole number of forms. I don't know if you've seen the web app Plink.
I have not.
Before Way, we were looking at a bunch of inspiration for playful systems that were non-biased and were basically just all-encompassing. So things like hacky sack, things like drum circles. I lived outside of Berkeley drum circle every Saturday, and I would just stand there, and they welcomed anybody. Everyone could come in and contribute, offer their voice, and then step back, and that was a great space for that sort of thing. Plink is basically a web browser drum circle, and you're not. Yes, you're not. They don't have the chat on the side. You're not actually like talking to them, but you get very playful moments, like feeling with these people, and you can like feel what they're thinking, and you guys can tell when you guys are working well together and bouncing off each other, and that for me is a very powerful feeling. Another example I'll use is this is a little bit grimmer or darker. The app Ocarina. Have you ever used Ocarina? It's an iPhone app. It basically turns the iPhone into a ocarina instrument, and there's one mode on it. I don't actually like to play, I'm terrible at it, but there's a mode where you can actually see a map of the world. And the way I like to use, and you can actually live stream and listen to people playing their ocarinas on their iPhones to the world. Well, I like to use the app for a very specific way, which is I like to, whenever there's a big event in the world, I'll go and I'll click my finger over there and I'll listen to the songs being played. So when the tsunami hit Japan, I went onto Ocarina and I, clicked my finger over the eastern coast of Japan, was like wondering if I would hear something, kind of like hoping, praying sort of thing. And the song that came back to me was Ode to Joy. And I was just like, I lost it at that point. But it was one of those things where the designer hadn't included a means for me to communicate back. Like, that's the one thing I wanted, like, oh, thank you, God bless. We're just sending like words of like, notes of love or something.
Right.
But that wasn't part of the design. And so just trying to think of the whole conversation and allowing for those moments to sort of blossom is important.
Amazing. Everyone, please give Chris Bell a hand.